I don't want to tack you and cram too much into one night. Okay? Probably one of the most important things for this last section or unit, if you want, is the great vowel shift. It's what it combined with the spelling innovations that we saw in the Middle English period are what make English spelling so not make any sense today. Okay, so we're going to go over that, and I've got a underneath that handout or underneath that set of notes, I've got a thing on the projector that will show you the great vowel shift in terms of the vowel triangle that you had in your notes for the first night of class, and it's got I always hate that word, a mnemonic device that might help you remember it. But let's start at the beginning here. Okay, consonant changes. What do I mean? Okay, consonant clusters continue to simplify. It's during the early modern English period that we see a lot of those Middle English GH consonant clusters simplify out to a couple of different sounds. They become nothing, as in the case of night or knight. Okay. N-I-G-H-T just becomes pronounced N-I-T, night. Okay. K-N, the K drops off. G-N, the G drops off. We don't say I'm going to go gnaw on a chicken leg. Okay. We don't pronounce this thing as our knee. Okay. We don't say kno. We say no. So all those K-Ns, G-Ns, things like that, those level out to just the second of those two sounds. But G-H, you get either nothing or it becomes like cough. Okay. Final ing. In Middle English, the ing was pronounced. It was pronounced as ing. Okay. But in early modern English times, like pre-Shakespeare and including some Shakespeare plays with this a little bit, it becomes in. So, whereas Chaucer would have said, I am running to Canterbury, Shakespeare would have said, I'm running. Okay. Now, imagine what your elementary school teachers would have said. Because it's only in the 19th century that emphasis on pronouncing that final G comes back into play. It comes back into play for the simple reason the G is there. It's spelled, therefore you should say it. But notice how illogical that is. Do we do that with every letter that we see? No, we don't. Okay. And even up through the 20th century, or into the 20th century, I should say, among the British upper class, it was kind of a mark of status or a class to drop that G and say in. If you've ever read Dorothy Sayers' Lord Peter Wimsey novels, Wimsey, who is a pretty high-ranking lord, Wimsey is always dropping his G's, but his butler, whose name just slipped my mind, always pronounces them very carefully. Okay? Vowel changes. They essentially all become the same, or stay the same as they were in Middle English. They don't change much. And your book goes into the vowel changes that do occur. But then you have the great vowel shift. Okay? It affects all the long vowels. So let me move this and put that up there. Okay? So if you look at the vowel chart, E, A, E, A, O, O, U, okay? And then the two diphthongs at the top, the one on my left is I, the one on my right is ow, okay? So look what happens. aw down at the bottom of the vowel triangle skips 2 vowel levels and jumps up to a. Okay? Goes all the way up to e. A goes up to e. Okay? On the right hand side, well, let me go all the way up at top left, E can't go any higher in the mouth and remain a pure single vowel. It becomes a diphthong. It becomes I. Notice when you say that carefully, I. The E is still there. It's a glide. It glides into it. I. It starts with the aw, and it becomes I. Might. Okay? On the right-hand side, okay, this is the back of the mouth now. Okay? Aw becomes O. So Middle English, saw. S-O. Saw becomes Modern English, so. Okay? O skips that next vowel level and goes all the way up to oo. And oo, because oo can't go any higher and still remain a pure vowel, becomes a diphthong. Ow. So, look at the little mnemonic device at the bottom. Middle English, me fate ak sa do oors. Okay? Look at the phonetic spelling. Me, okay? That's the I at the top left corner of the vowel triangle. A in fate, it's in the middle. Ok, it's down at the bottom. Sa do oors. That becomes in Modern English, my feet ache, so do ours. E to I, A to E, A to A, aw to O to oo to ow. Okay? We have no idea why this happens.
Is this on your notes also?
I'll put this on your notes, or I'll email this to you guys. It might be in the opening set of notes, but I don't have the lines drawn in it. The vowel triangle is drawn in. You could draw it in, but I'll scan this and send it to you. Like I said, no idea why this begins or why it happens in the first place. And it doesn't happen necessarily quickly. It probably is beginning right around the time of Chaucer's death, around 1400, and it doesn't completely end until at least 1700. Shakespeare, for example, Shakespeare probably did not have a pure A sound at all. I'm going to put up from this photocopy that I have, I'm going to put up a couple of phonetic transcriptions from some Shakespeare, and I think one of them is, I may not do that tonight. One is from Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, and another one, can't remember what the other one is. You've got a couple also in your book. But Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Modern English, we think that's A. It's not in Shakespeare, it's die. Die. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Is what it sounds like. Okay? So the little mnemonic device can help you remember that, because it is pretty significant. Let me move this. And I'll put a couple of other things from here up. Yeah, there it is. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'll put that back up in a moment. Poetic rhyme, early modern English pronunciation. That's how we know the great vowel shift is going on. Because you can see words in Shakespeare's day that rhymed that don't rhyme in our day. For example, the sound in the word T-E-A and the sound in the word S-T-E-A-K. In Shakespeare's day, they rhymed. Tea and steak. They don't today. Okay? And that's because they're changing. They're going through the great vowel shift. Okay? Morphology and syntax. Morphology, how words are composed and made up. Syntax, the arrangement or logical order of words in sentences. Okay, you have the confusion of final genitive S, that is, the possessive S, with the possessive pronoun his in ellipsis. Everybody know what ellipsis is when you elide something? Today we call it pretty much all forms of elisions contractions. They're not actually all the same. So, Shakespeare actually wrote, and we can see this in the First Folio and other editions of his works, so-and-so grabs or mars his sword. Mars, space, the word his, the word sword. Okay? That mars his comes to be elided, so that you're taking away the gap of sound in between the two. Mars is sword. The apostrophe S, originally, is to indicate the elision of his, or, in the case of a woman's sword, Edna, hers, sword. Edna, hers, sword. Okay? And so it's the elision of that. It's taking off the first sounds of that second word. That's why we have apostrophe S for our possessives today. Notice, it's incorrect. Anglo-Saxon had it correctly. Genitive, singular, had an ES ending. If we were going to be correct, we would just add ES on words to indicate possessive. How do you know it's incorrect? What good thing often screws people up? And I see this in professional writing. It's. It is, IT apostrophe S, but ITS, no apostrophe. You don't put an apostrophe for its when it's a pronoun. Okay? But we do for every other instance. Okay? It's just kind of silly. Dual third-person singular endings, the eth form, the native Old English that we were talking about earlier. The eth form, and then you have the Old Norse form, the final S ending. Okay? When King James assembled his scholars to translate the Bible into King James English, what form do they use? Eth. The 23rd Psalm says, "My cup runneth over." It doesn't say runs over. But in 1610, 1611, 1608, 1609, when they were working on that translation, if those scholars left those rooms at Oxford and Cambridge where they were doing the translating and went down the street to the pub and got a drink, they probably used the S ending in everyday normal speech. By the time the King James Bible was being translated, definitely by the time it was published in 1611, the S ending was the normal usage. Okay? The eth ending was deliberately archaic. Okay? Because they wanted to make the language of the Bible sound a little bit removed. What else? Problems or confusion with second person pronouns. You, thou, ye, thee. Okay? The you, ye are plural forms in Middle English. Like today, I would say, how did you like class? What do we tend to say, however, in Southern America? y'all. Okay? That's a new form. I fully predict that within 100, 150 years, it'll be a completely recognized separate pronoun form. Y'all. Okay? But they didn't have that. They had you and ye and thou and thee. Thou and thee were first person. Okay? Were singular forms. And you and ye were plural forms. Okay? And what happens is because you have them working side by side, the you and ye become somewhat formal forms. Okay? For example, they would be a form that a parent would use with a child, okay, to indicate parental authority kind of thing. A child could use that with a parent to indicate, authority. All right? The TH forms were much more familiar. Right? Kind of interesting when you think about that. What form does the King James Bible use with the Lord's Prayer? It uses only the TH forms. Well, keep in mind, who's saying the Lord's Prayer? Jesus. Who's he talking to? Daddy. Okay? Indicating the familiarity. Now, you've got in your textbook, you don't have to pull it up. I'm going to see if I can find it again. I thought I had it marked earlier, but it might have been what I had in the next chapter. Yeah, it is. It's apparently what I'm talking about tonight is in chapter 8. It's the scene where Hamlet and his mother are talking, and she says, Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Okay? Hamlet, mother, you have my father much offended. So she's kind of talking down to him. He's talking respectfully. And then she says, come, you answer with an idle tongue. Okay? When she uses that you, she's indicating there's a distance. And then she says, what wilt thou do? Wilt thou murder me? Indicating, this growing gap. So we tend to think that thou and thee, this is an elevated formal form. It's not. That's the familiar. That's what, the kind of language you would use with a lover. That's what Romeo and Juliet ought to be using with each other. I don't have any idea, by the way, if they do. I was going to bring in a copy of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Because in the Two Towers, there's a scene where Aragorn and Eowyn are talking. And Tolkien, who knew this stuff like the back of his hand, okay, Tolkien has Eowyn within the conversation suddenly shift, okay, from this formal to this informal. And if I remember correctly, when she shifts to the informal, Aragorn shifts to the formal. Because she's got the hots for him. And Aragorn's kind of trying to say, already taken, back off, What else? Eventual loss of the you-ye case distinction entirely. Why? Because they're not pronounced you, ye. They come to be pronounced you, ye. Okay? And it's hard to tell the difference between those. What else is also lost? The TH forms. Okay? Those ultimately get lost entirely. I mean, nobody speaks those today. Unless they're, got King James Bible on the brain or something. You do hear them today in public prayers. You'll hear them, at the opening of sessions of Congress. You'll hear them in, prayers at inaugurations and things like that. Okay? And again, I think it's because the speaker thinks It's formal, it's elevated, it's showing proper deference to God, when in case they ought to be saying you or ye rather than thou. Proper verb form for second person singular. Is it you was or is it you were? Well, to my grandmother, who only ever achieved 8th grade education, it was always you was. Okay? But in the Middle Ages, you was perfectly acceptable. Okay? We'll look at pronouns in Shakespeare next week, I think. Or not next week, 2 weeks. I think we're not going to have class next week. Ain't drives my mother-in-law absolutely Betsy. She was an elementary school teacher for like 34 years. Ain't is a perfectly acceptable contraction for I am not. It's when you say, they ain't gonna do it. Well, then what are you saying? They am not? Well, that's just bad English. Okay, or we ain't gonna do it. We am not? Well, again, that's just bad English. But every time you say, I ain't, that is perfectly normal. Is it appropriate for written formal English? No, because contractions aren't. I mean, I direct student, graduate theses and dissertations. There will be contractions. And every time I have to say, contractions are not acceptable in formal, scholarly, research work. Okay? But if you're out speaking, I tell my kids every now and then, go up to grandma and say, I ain't, just to get a rise out of her. Because boy, does it work. Okay? Shall and will. How do you use those? Artificial usage of will in first person. I will, you shall. Because what's the difference in those? Will is volition. Shall is obligation. You can't put yourself in an obligatory stance. But you can say, you shall, do better on your next exam or something like that. Notice what Gandalf says, since I've got Tolkien on the brain. What Gandalf says to the Balrog. You shall not pass. He doesn't say you will not. Okay? Because he can't stop his volition. None of us can stop anybody else's volition. Part 2. We're probably going to end up going through all the information that's in both these chapters tonight. Reasons for development. That is, reasons for the growth in the English language during this period. Okay? The printing press. Gutenberg prints his Bible in Germany in 1456. He brings the printing press, or he doesn't, William Caxton, brings the printing press to England in 1474. Sets up shop right outside Westminster, right outside St. Paul's Cathedral in Westminster. Okay? So what does this do? Whereas prior to Gutenberg's printing press, if you wanted one of these, how did you get it? You paid somebody to make it for you. How was it made? Okay, they didn't have cardboard bindings that were wrapped in plastic. Everything was made out of cow or sheep hide. So, in order to have a book, you had to be able to afford to pay for a few cows or sheep to be slaughtered to provide the vellum or parchment to be written on for the pages. It is a time-consuming process. I mean, you don't go kill a cow and make a book in a week. It takes a process for the hide to dry, for it to air out, for it to be scrubbed clean, for it to dry again, because it takes repeated scrubbings to get all the hair and the hair follicles essentially out of the hide. Okay? Then you have to make your ink. You have to pluck the goose to get the quill, to make the quill, to write, etc. Gutenberg enters the picture. Okay? Paper starts being made. and you set up a printing press, and you ink the letter forms on it, you put a sheet of paper in, you pull it down, you press it, and you've just printed a page in 10 seconds. You put another sheet, you print it again, and so it starts becoming possible to print, something like this, which they didn't print this size. They would have printed essentially 4 times this size, okay, to print 50 copies fairly quickly. And you would have publications that would be, they're called broadsides, just one big sheet of paper like this, okay. Then they come up with the bright idea, because we saw this, you see this with manuscript, well, you can also print it so that it's folded, so that it's smaller, it's easier to put in a pocket, you can carry it around, you can print it all the way, you can get down to books that are this size. And there's actually books even much smaller than that. I've seen books in a couple of libraries in England that are about 2 inches tall by 1 inch wide, okay, made on a printing press. This is a little teeny tiny type, okay. So what else? It's the Renaissance. What's the Renaissance the rebirth of? Learning. It was the Renaissance scholars who termed it the Renaissance. It was the Renaissance scholars who termed everything between the Renaissance and the classical period the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. Middle, like middle children, not quite grown up, okay? They thought of themselves as being the best and brightest period. So what comes along with the rise in the Renaissance, this emphasis on classical languages and a humanistic education, okay? So you have people learning and being taught not only Greek and Latin, but if you're from a well-to-do family in England, you're also learning French, you're learning Italian, okay? You're learning German probably. And then you also have an increase or a rise in the English national consciousness, okay? Which really gets a shot in the pants, so to speak, from the Spanish Armada defeat in 1588. Okay? It comes before then. I mean, you have this rise in nationalism before then with Henry VIII's wars against France. Cheering on England, jolly old England against, the dirty French and all that kind of stuff. But the Spanish Armada, that was something huge. 300 Spanish galleons sail from Spain to invade England, and only something like 20 go home. And most of those are destroyed in a storm, where the English don't have to do hardly anything at all. The English interpreted that natural occurrence, the storm that wiped out the Spanish Armada, as a sign from God that good Queen Bess, Queen Elizabeth, was blessed by him. Okay? What else? English replaces Latin as a respectable tongue. Okay? That had been going on since Chaucer's day. When Thomas More wrote Utopia in 1517, he wrote it in Latin. He didn't translate it into English for about, I want to say about 10 years. So it was only available in Latin. Well, who's he writing for then? He's not writing for everybody. He's writing for the community of scholars who spoke and read Latin regularly. Okay? Caxton isn't printing a ton of Latin material. He is printing some, but he's printing material in English. He's printing Chaucer. He's printing Malory. Okay, once Malory comes around. Later on, we'll see Spenser being printed, and then by the time Shakespeare's around, plays are being printed left and right. What else? Well, just as English is gaining vogue in its home country, Italian is, or has already, gained acceptability in Italy. Dante, was writing in the 1300s. Du Bellay in France was writing material in colloquial French. He wasn't writing in Italian. Okay? And then we start to see this period of English translations beginning in the 1540s and 50s. William Golding translates Ovid from Latin into English. Chapman translates Homer from Greek. Okay? Man, I'm drawing blanks on a lot of first names. Surrey, whose first name left me again, translates Virgil's Aeneid. Christopher North, I think it's Christopher, translates Plutarch's Lives of the Caesars. Okay? And then obviously the King James Bible. There are other translations of the Bible also. You've got the Great Bible, the Geneva Bible. Tyndale had been translating, and Coverdale had been translating the Bible, but theirs weren't approved. Henry VIII actually had Tyndale hunted down, thrown in prison in Amsterdam, I think it was, where he died. Okay, because it wasn't approved by Henry VIII. Henry VIII would later issue a version of the New Testament that was based on Tyndale's version. Guy that he essentially had killed. Okay, Richard Mulcaster. These are who these two quotes are from at the bottom. Mulcaster was Queen Elizabeth's tutor. So this guy had power. He had prestige. He said, I do not think that any language, be it whatsoever, is better able to utter all arguments, either with more pith or greater plainness than our English tongue is. For is it not indeed a marvelous bondage to become servants to one tongue for learning's sake, meaning Latin? In order to, at this time period, in order to go to, I almost said Harvard, in order to go to Oxford or Cambridge, you had to know Latin and Greek. Some of the classes were only conducted in Greek, like Homer. Others were only conducted in Latin, like everything else. Okay? Whereas we may have the very same treasure in our own tongue, our own bearing the joyful title of our liberty and freedom, the Latin tongue, remembering us of our thraldom and bondage, that is, our servitude to something else that was not native to us. I love Rome, but London better. I favor Italy, but England more. I honor the Latin, but I worship the English. Now, if I remember right, he writes this in the late 1580s or early 1590s. It's before Shakespeare. Okay? But it's after Edmund Spenser's been writing. It's after Sir Philip Sidney's been writing. It's still not... It's kind of on the cusp of all the great works of the Elizabethan period. And he's saying, before even getting a chance to read or see those plays, look how much better English is. Okay? I take this present period of our English tongue to be the very height thereof, meaning this is the golden age of the English language, because I find it so excellently well refined, both for the body of the tongue itself and for the customary writing thereof, as either foreign workmanship can give it gloss. What does he mean by foreign workmanship can give it gloss? By gloss, he means sheen. He doesn't mean like to explain difficult words. He means can add to it. So what's foreign workmanship? What does English do with all other languages? It borrows from them. I was going to say it sucks from them, but I like borrows. It's classier. Okay? Mm-hmm. It borrows. It takes from other languages. Or as home-wrought handling can give it grace. When the age of our people, which now use the tongue so well, is dead and departed, there will another succeed. By the way, he's telling us something here that people still today don't understand. And it's kind of what we began the semester with. All languages change. You cannot stop the language from changing. The French have been trying for 50 years at least. Okay? there will another succeed, and with the people the tongue will alter and change. But whatsoever shall become of the English state, the government, the people, the English tongue cannot prove fairer than it is at this day. And I would put money on the table that if we could bring Richard Mulcaster back from the dead, he would say, I was right. If it may please our learned sort to esteem so of it, and bestow their travail, their hard work, their study upon such a subject, the English language. Why? So capable of ornament, so proper to themselves, and the more to be honored. Why? Because it is their own. The passage that I'd wanted us to read from John of Trevisa's, Robert of Gloucester's Chronicle, was where he talks about, and he's writing in the 1300s, if I remember correctly. He talks about how English is not the national language. It's 1200s, I think. How English is not the national language. And people are learning French. And he's kind of like, why? Why do we do this to ourselves? Okay. He was a scholar. He was learned. He understood. He knew French because he had to get along with the upper class and stuff. But even he was saying, several hundred years before this, we need to change. We need to focus on our own language, our own tongue. Okay? Here's what we'll go through tonight. Let me go back here. Down at the bottom. So, Mulcaster, late 1580s, early 1590s, he's praising English. He's saying it's capable of expressing everything that you can express in Latin. Okay? It's capable of being used for great, wonderful works of literature, etc. But there's still three problems that remain. Okay? The first one has to deal with pronunciation. What do I mean? There's no standard. At the time when Mulcaster was writing, when Shakespeare was writing, even after Shakespeare's death, there's no standard. There's no common pronounced form. Okay? East Midlands will arise as the standard form. East Midlands is not necessarily London English. Okay? It's close. London is right on the southern border of the East Midlands. Okay? The great vowel shift ends, but it doesn't end, like I said. Oops. It doesn't end for quite a while. Second thing, problems of unsettled orthography. Orthography is spelling. We have 6 signatures by Shakespeare. He spells his name 3 different ways. Shakespeare, P-E-R-E. Shakespeare, P-E-A-R, I think. And Shakespeare, S-P-E-A-R. Okay? Why? It just kind of depended on the mood he was in, I guess. Because there wasn't any standard spelling form. Okay? Mulcaster, the one we were just reading, Richard Mulcaster, he wrote his Elementary in 1582. It's a spelling book. It's telling people how to spell. Now, one thing, I don't think I have in these notes anywhere, is one thing kind of gradually helps the spelling regularization anyways. and it's the rise of the printing press. As books become printed, okay, you have people setting type in print who, for one reason or another, they choose spellings one over another. Sometimes, for example, with Shakespeare's First Folio, which we have a copy in here somewhere, not a real one, a facsimile. I've got one in my office. On Shakespeare's First Folio, you'll see the same word spelled 2 or 3 different times in a single line. You'll see the word be, for example, spelled B-E, B-E-E. And I think I've even seen it with 3 E's before. Okay. Sometimes in Shakespeare, in the First Folio, it's because the printer or the compositor is trying to get the line to fill the full frame. Okay, they'll do that, or they'll throw a lead spacer between letters so it looks like proportional spacing. But that spelling issue, that becomes really problematic because you'll have people spell the way they pronounce words. It's called pronunciation spelling, okay? Depending upon where your dialect is. It's one great way, the fact that we have all this material, it's one great way to tell the dialect of where somebody was from, okay? That's why Tolkien, for example, with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Tolkien could narrow Sir Gawain and the Green Knight down to about, if I think it's right, about a 20-mile radius of the city of Chester. Chester at the center, draw a radius of 20 miles, and then draw that circle. Okay? And Tolkien said, based upon the linguistic characteristics within the poem, whoever wrote this lived within this 20-mile circle. What else? The seeming want or lack of English vocabulary. It was thought that the English language wasn't rich enough in terms of its quantity of words. Okay? Well, the English language never had a problem with borrowing words. So, what you see happen in the Renaissance is purposeful adding to the vocabulary. Okay? Look at that next, 5.1. Over 10,000 words, and I didn't bring that book, over 10,000 words from over 50 different languages are borrowed during the Renaissance. Over 50% of those words we still use. Bear in mind, over 10,000 words were borrowed just from French during the Middle English period, and we use over 75% of those words. So, 10,000 words from 50 different languages. That is, no single one of those 50 different languages had as great an impact as French did during the Middle English period. Okay? So, enrichment. This is the term that was used by Renaissance writers for solving the problem of the poor, seemingly poor vocabulary. Let's enrich it with terms from Latin and Greek. Okay? There are 3 kinds of enrichment or borrowings, let's say. Inkhorn terms, oversea terms, and Chaucerisms. Look at the Inkhorn terms first. These are terms ascribed to the quote-unquote makers of English. These are all scholars. Okay? They're called Inkhorn terms because they have the air or they reek of coming from the inkhorn. Some guy sitting at his desk, dipping his pen in the inkhorn as he's doing what? Bringing in all these foreign words. Okay? A few examples. Thomas Eliot, Thomas More, and Shakespeare are 3 of the big inkhorn term folks. From Latin, allurement, illusion, capsule, dexterity, halo, expensive, adapt, disregard, alienate, assassinate, mediate. From Greek, anachronism, autograph, antithesis, caustic, chaos, chronology, climax, critic, dogma, pneumonia, catastrophe, lexicon, misanthrope. Okay? From the makers of English, From just Sir Thomas More. Absurdity, acceptance, anticipate, compatible, contradictory, enunciation, exact. They didn't have the word exact. I find that amazing. It should be exaggerate. There is no such word as exaggerate. Fact, explain, indifference. From Sir Thomas Eliot. Accommodate, analogy, encyclopedia, excerpt, excrement, experience, frugality, etc. Shakespeare, exist. To be, not to exist or not to exist, okay? Initiate, jovial, accommodation. Notice, Eliot introduced accommodate, and what does Shakespeare do? Accommodate's a verb. He makes it into a noun. Okay? Apostrophe. We saw assassinate earlier under the inkhorn terms. Shakespeare makes a noun out of it. Assassination. Dexterously, dislocate, frugal, misanthrope, pedant, etc. Oversea terms. These are terms, obviously, that come from foreign countries. They come from trade or through trade. From Italian, one of my least favorite words, algebra. Argosy, balcony. Be kind of hard to have Romeo and Juliet without the balcony scene. Cameo, stanza, design, violin, etc. From Spanish and Portuguese. Alligator, like they really have the need for the word alligator in England. Anchovy, apricot, armada, banana, hammock, hurricane, maze. Notice how many of these Spanish Portuguese are from where? They're not from Spain and Portugal. They're from the New World. Okay? French, alloy, bigot, bizarre, bombast. It's almost like you see a theme being created. But then you have chocolate. Comrade, dual, entrance, genteel. Chaucerisms. These are, it was thought, old words that they're trying to resuscitate, trying to bring back into the language. Okay? Belt. And I think that's probably both the noun and the verb. To belt someone and to put on a belt. Bevy, dapper, forthright, glen, glee, glance. Those are all Scottish in origin. Surly, birthright, elfin, disrobe, dawn, enshrine, etc. Okay? Fleecy, grovel. So, we'll stop with after this summary of the Renaissance. Summary of the Renaissance. The language is fluid. It's flexible. Why? It's growing. It's like an amoeba. It can be made to fit whatever one needs of it. I'll do it the next time we meet. I meant to bring in tonight, because we're going to do Shakespeare, I meant to bring in a little book called The Miracle of Language, and just read almost an entire chapter from it, because it's really good. And like I said, I'll do that next time. Shakespeare had a vocabulary of about 20,000 words. His is the first recorded usage of 1,800 of those words. That can mean one of two things. Other people were using them, but nobody wrote it down. Or Shakespeare created those words. Because he's writing on along, and he needs to describe how dexterous somebody is. And what does he do? Dexterously. I'll just make an adverb out of dexterous. Or plotting the assassin. I need a noun. I can't say plotting to assassinate. I want plotting assassination. Okay? It doesn't show up anywhere before Shakespeare. So he does that. So the fluidity and flexibility of the language. It's individualistic. Notice, we can trace words to individual writers and say, look, so-and-so brought this word in, etc. Okay? Ultimately, that one word, enrichment, because that implies the fluidity, it implies the flexibility, it implies the borrowing of all these other words, okay? And I've got another, textbook in my office that I used one time that it has at the back, it's got all these tables. Actually, it has a second book that you can get that goes along with it that shows words and the date that they enter the language. And man, for the Renaissance, it's amazing some of the words that enter the language during this period. Now we're going to stop there for tonight because the Restoration in the 18th century is an attempt to put the brakes on the flexibility of the Renaissance. And we'll pick up that next time.